¿Cómo sacar rentabilidad a tus XRP? Esta es una de las preguntas más importantes, la pregunta más importante sin duda, si eres un inversor a largo plazo en XRP, si entiendes la infraestructura y no estás pensando en el precio en los próximos trimestres, sino que estás pensando en un horizonte temporal de mínimo 5 años desde el punto de entrada. Hoy te traigo un vídeo un poco diferente. En este vídeo entrevisto a Hugo Philion, el CEO de Flare Networks, la forma nativa DeFi de sacar rentabilidad a tus XRP. Pequeño disclaimer, yo a día de hoy todavía no estoy poniendo mis XRP a trabajar. Cuando lo haga, con un proyecto que espero anunciar dentro de poco, cuando lo haga, os informaré y seréis los primeros en saberlo. ¿Cómo lo estoy haciendo? ¿A través de qué vehículo? ¿Y cómo navegar este mercado especulativo hasta que llegue el mercado de utilidad? Pero hoy en este vídeo quiero traerte la visión tan particular del CEO de Flare, que sin duda conoce muy bien este ecosistema, sabe qué ha ocurrido en el pasado, sabe en qué punto estamos ahora, y al final de la entrevista compartiré contigo un par de reflexiones que me parecen interesantes. La entrevista, como pequeño aviso, se realiza en inglés, pero está subtitulada al castellano para que puedas entenderlo en caso de que no hables inglés. Aquí te dejo la entrevista. So, hello again. This time we have Hugo Philion, the CEO of Flare. Welcome, welcome, Hugo.
Thank you for having me.
So, in case somebody doesn't know you, I doubt it, but let's kick with a brief, if you could briefly walk us through who you are, how you got into funding Flare, your background before this, and basically what led you to building this ecosystem.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Hugo, and I'm the founder of, co-founder of Flare. Before I was in blockchain, before I was in crypto, I was a commodity trader at a number of funds in the UK. I had a reasonable sized portfolio. It was an interesting job, but it seems a little hollow. I didn't feel like I was making anything. I felt like I was always playing catch up with the markets. So I quit that and went to study machine learning or AI at UCL. That's where I met my co-founders. I was obviously interested in AI at that time. Broadly, I'm interested in sort of how things work. Crypto was very interesting to me, coming from a financial background. There's a lot of, I guess, stumbling blocks in finance where a lot of people are kept out of finance. Even for traders, there's a lot of things you can't do. Like, for instance, trade at the weekends when there's a major global event. Crypto seemed like firstly, a more efficient system, possibly a fairer system, although I don't think that's necessarily 100% true. Not necessarily in what we've seen. But that led me to crypto. And then once we decided we wanted to be in crypto or blockchain, we had to figure out what we wanted to do. And broadly, we settled on an L1 that was highly decentralized, that had its own oracles, its own systems for getting data from elsewhere. And we looked around at the immediate use cases for that. And we thought that providing capabilities for tokens like XRP, Bitcoin, to enter DeFi in a wholly decentralized, streamlined way was a very, very good first use case. I think we've now brought that use case to fruition in its early days, but it's there. And I think, there are many more use cases for which an L1 that is focused on data, decentralized data, can be used. So I think we'll probably cover some of those.
Yeah, great. Great to see that brief intro. So before we get into individual products, how should XRP holders understand the relationship between the XRP ledger and Flare? What is each network best positioned to do?
Sure. I mean, XRP Ledger has for a long time been a very stable network, very good for relatively basic functionality such as transfers, some DEX stuff. But obviously it doesn't have composability and it doesn't have smart contracts. So building out more complex applications on XRP Ledger is not possible today. There's some amendments, but they're very, very specific. take a long time to enable. And you're never going to get the same kind of permissionless DeFi ecosystem on the XRP ledger as in terms of trying to replicate the rest of the DeFi ecosystem. So Flare fills that gap, really for XRP and hopefully for other tokens later down the line, like Bitcoin. That's not the only thing Flare does, but it is the most notable thing Flare does today. So, if you're an XRP holder, you can think of Flare as the place to deploy your XRP. And really, there have been other attempts at providing similar functionality. I think our approach has been the most significant in the market, but also the most well thought through. I don't think anyone else has really got an end-to-end ecosystem to deploy XRP like Flare does.
Nice to. I agree with that part. What in regards to the next months, years, what concrete, especially now that everybody's talking about Clarity Act, but what concrete unlock in the area of regulatory, institutional custody, stablecoin liquidity, or any other areas would mark the real inflection point for where XRP-Fi would stop being early, so to speak, and becomes a more mature utility market at scale? What's that stopping that scale?
Yeah, so I don't think it's regulatory clarity. I don't think that's a big one, because at least the way Flare implements XRP-Fi, it's hugely decentralized. So it's sort of outside of the regulatory scope, so to speak, or at least most parts of it are. So things like borrowing, dexes, perps dexes, all those kind of basic DeFi functions are broadly outside the regulatory scope. So for me, it's really about building the market out. It's a new market. People are, forming a market is not an immediate process, right? You don't just get two sides of an equation that just come together in a very short amount of time. So, for me, it's probably around stablecoin liquidity is our biggest hurdle. I think this interview will go out after we have some announcements next week on Monday, which I believe you might be aware of. But one of the things that we will have announced by the time this interview goes out is that Centaura have enabled FXRP to be to borrow RLUSD in the Morpho market on Ethereum mainnet. So for us, just finding stable coin liquidity, finding effectively stables are the scarce resource in the space. And so for us, building out that access to stables is pretty critical for the expansion of XRP-Fi.
Interesting point. And in regards to, so you would say that Clarity basically has no weight in what Flare is. Would you agree with that sentence, that Clarity has no weight?
Well, it doesn't have no weight. It has no effect on what we've built. Okay. But those are two different things. We have built a car, but if you have better roads, you can drive that car faster. Clarity is the better roads. So, the more institutions that are able to deploy funds, whether those are stable coins, XRP, Bitcoin, or anything else that Flare will touch, the better it is for the whole ecosystem. But the reality is that sort of very, very little that exists on Flare is within scope of Clarity.
Okay. And without naming counterparties, what does the most advanced institutional deployment on Flare look like today structurally, and what would they actually be doing?
So I'd say the most advanced institutional deployment is that there are institutions deployed into Firelight, which is a protocol on Flare that is built by Centaura with help from Flare around a simple, easy way to deploy your Flare and get yield. It is a DeFi cover protocol. It exists to provide coverage for other DeFi protocols. And in providing that coverage, you get a yield. There's obviously risk embedded in providing that coverage, but the Centaur team, have a very strong background in analyzing the risks across the space. And so I'm fairly optimistic that they're able to manage the risks of the Firelight protocol. So institutions, that sit on large amounts of XRP, and predominantly those are exchanges, and some custodians that hold on behalf of maybe high net worth individuals and some funds. But predominantly the institutions we're going after are crypto exchanges that sit on vast amounts of XRP on behalf of their customers. So, that's the most mature use case. I expect to see sort of other institutional use cases come to the fore. I know that Uphold has said that they will want to be deploying to Firelight, but I also expect to see a borrowing market, an institutional borrowing market for using XRP as collateral in order to borrow stables or other types of token, but principally stables.
And in regards to regulation determines whether an institution is permitted to participate, and infrastructure.
So again, I think it depends which institution you're talking about. Most institutions in the space, such as crypto institutions, they don't, such as crypto institutions like exchanges, they don't seem to be in any way hamstrung by regulation. They seem happy to go ahead. They just need the market to mature. I think when you're talking about institutions like banks, maybe more traditional asset managers, the Clarity provides value there. But I don't think it's necessarily a reality that many banks are managing large amounts of XRP on behalf of their clients today. They may hold XRP because of deals with Ripple and things like that, but I don't think they're generally looking to deploy XRP. I think our principal, users at Flare are crypto-focused funds, exchanges, and retail that hold XRP.
And are institutions more likely to enter the Flare ecosystem first through custody and tokenization infrastructure, or through an existing financial use case such as borrowing, vaults, or FI?
I think borrowing, vaults, the basic DeFi primitives are where we're seeing the most traction. So Firelight and borrowing. Those are very nice, easy to serve needs for users because you put borrowing on the end of an earn program. So suddenly, you have more markets with which to serve your users, and for the user, it's a one-click experience. They get to press the yes, I want to earn button, and then the whole system can work.
And how have you seen a difference between retail and large institutions? For example, the requirements between large institutional holders and retail users, like different audit standards, different gaps, different terms, or
we don't build products that we don't think are fit for institutional. So our audit standards. I'll give you an example. We've worked with an exchange which I cannot name. They are one of the, and it's not Uphold. They're one of the most tricky exchanges to get over the line in terms of due diligence. The due diligence we did with them with regards to using FXRP on Flare, it took a record short amount of time because we have, built this in such a way that we have all the audits, we have a lot of testing. The system is quite easy to understand for someone doing due diligence. It's very evident that when we've built FXRP, for instance, that we've embedded very, very substantial risk management procedures, such as using the XRP escrow system. So, for us, we never build anything that for retail that we wouldn't give to institutions. That said, institutions need different liquidity parameters because they're deploying larger amounts of money. So, there's a kind of on the building side, it's the same product. On the business side, you require that there's different requirements.
So basically, holders, retail investors of XRP are going to benefit of an institutional grade product, being a retail investor without all the limits that normally exist or barriers that normally exist for retail investors to access. So in regards to redirect again the conversation, as an XRP holder, why should Firelight be interesting to, for example, me specifically? What does it offer that I can't get elsewhere with XRP?
So any kind of yield product, it must be taking risk in order to generate yield. Whether you are collateralizing your XRP to get stable coins to deploy those stable coins in a protocol that makes more money than the cost of the borrow, or you're using Firelight, they all have some degree of risk. I think with regards to your specific question of what you're getting that you can't get anywhere else. First of all, you're getting a fully decentralized system. So you're not giving your XRP to a centralized entity that can go and trade off the blockchain with that XRP. So it's fundamentally different in that respect. But secondly, Firelight is a coverage protocol, which is a different set of risks, but also something that the Centaura team understand well, and something which, I'm very confident that they both understand, are able to manage, and are choosing the right partners. I've seen the level of analysis they go to with regards to analyzing the coverage that they will underwrite. And I know who their first partners are. These are not entities where I see, broad systemic risks. So, I think you're getting, in short, for the user, the goal of Firelight is that you're getting a very good return for a very low quantum of risk. Okay,
makes sense. And in regards to Flare's strategy, so Flare has, I think it's plus 150 ecosystem partners, and the problem is, like every company, it has a finite engineering team, right? So how do you actually decide what gets built first? Is it a demand for a specific counterparty, or is it your own architectural sequencing?
So we've, a lot of what people have seen in the XRP community for a long period of time has been architectural sequencing. Having put that architecture in place, it's then the build then becomes around what the business sequencing is. So supporting new price feeds, supporting new custodians, new tokens that come from other chains, all those kind of things, and building out the businesses around them, building out the use cases and businesses around them. And obviously there's a million things we'd like to do. There's a few, there's some, we've built out this first set of architecture, which is kind of what you see with Flare now, which is what we kind of term Flare 1.0, and we've effectively built that and it's done. There's always maintenance and upgrades and, what can we do? But now we're building what we call Flare 2.0, which is involves really what we call the Flare confidential computation. And this is the layer of TEs that sits next to Flare and is secured by the validators. And this is a whole new architecture, because trust execution environments give you verifiability, secrecy, and substantial compute. That's kind of early days in terms of what's going to be put in that. We know what we will be putting in it specifically, and that is other types of F asset. and something we call protocol managed wallets, which allow an application on Flare to control wallets on other chains like XRP, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, directly from Flare. So you can think of it as an autonomous wallet that is controlled by an application rather than a multi-sig or a bunch of people. So this lets an application make transactions on other chains. And that's quite interesting. We can cover that. So I hope I've answered the question.
Yes, you've covered the question. Thanks and in regards to, for example, F assets, how does the over collateralization model actually work? What does it mean for how much FXRP can exist at any given time, for example?
So an infinite amount of FXRP, up to the amount, obviously, of XRP that exists in the world, can be created on Flare. Where we use collateralization is through the gating of minting and redemption. So when you mint and redeem, that is over collateralized. It's a gating system that if anything goes wrong with that transaction, there's money to pay for it. We then have something called a core vault, which uses the XRP escrow system to effectively warehouse XRP that cannot be supported by the collateral. So effectively, the way it works is it's slightly different today, but I'll just run through it because it gives a good understanding of it. Is you collateralize on the way in, and then an agent will send excess XRP to the core vault. And then you'll collateralize on the way out. And if the agent doesn't have XRP, but they have it from the core vault, they can pull it back from the core vault. But critically, only the agents can send and redeem XRP from the core vault. And this is enforced by code. And we use escrows on top of that so that even if the system were under attack, the escrow would not allow large amounts of XRP to be pulled out of the system.
Okay, and in regards to detecting new opportunities, when you personally evaluate a new opportunity, a protocol to integrate, incubate, or partner with, what's your own risk framework, and what does you make say no to some projects?
So I suppose it depends on whether we are funding that or not. So for instance, we invested heavily in Firelight because first of all, Firelight came from an open call that we had with regards to a particular thing that we wanted to see on Flare. So we wrote up a document that said, anyone that's working on something like this would be very interesting to us. And Centaura responded to that. And we put a large amount of our own capital into that to start it off. And with regards to that, it's just looking at the market, looking at the use case, looking at how hard it is to achieve. There's a lot of parameters that go into building a product, and it's hard to get a product off the ground. So, is it going to work? Does the tech support it? Is there a demand for it? That kind of stuff.
And in regards to, again, picking up on the difference between retail investors and institutional investors, where do you see the biggest mismatch between how retail investors perceive risk in DeFi and how risk is actually distributed, like across smart contracts, collateral, oracle, custodial layers?
So I think the way I'd see it is, if we're putting aside institutions for a second, retail are maybe more naive when it comes to risk. They are prepared to use perhaps bridges with less audits, less robustness, less, those kind of things. Oracle systems that have less decentralization. I think in order to analyze these protocols, it's hard. You need to be really quite well versed in things, and that's why Flare has always set out to build the entire stack such that it's really decentralized and has as many risk mitigations as possible, from the network itself to the structure of the FXRP bridge. And we engage risk monitors, Hypernative, for the whole ecosystem. We pay for that. We pay for Hypernative to monitor the whole ecosystem and to work with projects to, if anything goes wrong, to shut it down as quickly as possible. So that's what we do. I'd say, the mismatch between retail and institutions is that institutions are better at analyzing it.
Okay, yeah, I agree on that one. I have the opportunity to speak to both institutional profiles and retail profiles, and you can see a huge difference in how they perceive risk. So, for example, the withdrawal time right now, how the ecosystem is built, the sooner you can withdraw something, if you compare it with, for example, building a skyscraper, right? So a skyscraper is something that is very stable. It's a proven business model. You have the land, you have the building, you have everybody knows what to expect, but it means that you have to have more your money, more time locked in the project, right? So in the DeFi, I wanted to know what your perception is. Do you think over time we're going to see more longer time periods for lockups? Do you think that's going to be more TradFi focus strategies, or do you see how do you see that evolving? I hope I explained myself with the lockup periods.
So I think it depends on the complexity of the product. Right now products in crypto are not that complex. It's like I take XRP, I collateralize it, I borrow dollars, I put those dollars somewhere. I'm able to bring those dollars back quickly. Maybe I loop that, right? And I get, amp up my yield. Those are products that you can unpick really quickly. And so the lockup time doesn't need to be long. With regards to Firelight, totally different set of risks. They're selling coverage on a 30-day basis. So it's rolling 30-day coverage. The lockup time, therefore, has to be 30 days. It can't be uncovered, during if there's a call for funds. So, that's a slightly more complex product, but also has totally different risks. And, for both retail and institutional investors, it's about balancing the risk reward ratio, making sure that you're getting a better return for the same, for if you're taking more risk, you should be getting a better return. It's quite simple, but so as products get more complex, and they will get more complex, as we get through tokenization, then yeah, I think lockups will become longer, but hopefully the returns will be better.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how both worlds are gonna end up colliding. And in regards to, I've seen you very active lately in Twitter in regards to the next 6 months. Is there something you could explain, or why you're being so active in Twitter? Why are you so happy about the next 6 months?
Yeah, sure. So, I think everything is, we discussed earlier that, architecture, business, the different phases of things. With FXRP, we started with the architecture. We are now in the business phase. We've had reasonable success in a really unpleasant market. Like, you talk to institutions, crypto exchanges, their desire to do things right now, or 3 months ago, very, very limited. Because the returns are poor and the risks are high. So, that's been a process for us. There's a number of things in play. First of which, this will go out after, the announcement that Centaura have enabled borrowing of RLUSD against FXRP. For me, this is a huge unlock. Firstly, it's the stable coin that is issued by, Ripple, which is big for the community. But secondly, it's a very large vault. It's 280 million right now. And so that's a very good source of liquidity that will help us increase the scope of XRP-Fi. Obviously, it's not immediately going to be all 280 million. It's not going to be accessible on day one, right? That's not how these things work. They have risk parameters. But as time goes on, that will, hopefully increase. And there's a number of initiatives, both with Centaura and with other entities, exchanges, other groups that provides, access to stable coins for XRP-Fi. So both the input, so how much XRP can we get? That's exchanges. How much stables can we get against that XRP? That's, Centaura, other curators, other protocols in different ecosystems, and protocols on Flare. So all of those things over the next 6 months have components that will be changing very substantially. So for instance, there will be, I think exchanges that come in a big style. But, for us, it's about getting the stable coins first. We can't serve the exchanges without getting the access to the stable coins. So over the 6 months, a lot of that is, I think, provided we don't have like a worse market than we currently have, I think a lot of that's going to unlock.
Okay. And what do you think is currently missing that you would like to see and in the next, I don't know, let's say 12 to 24 months? And how do you see the ecosystem evolving?
So missing, I'd like more stablecoins directly on Flare. At the moment, our stablecoin strategy is to go and get them from other chains. So bridging FXRP out to Ethereum and Solana, Base, whatever. That's been our growth strategy for probably 4 or 5 months at this point. I'd like to see more stables come to Flare, but that's a hard to ask, right? It's just the way the market is right now. I think it will change over time as XRP expands and increases, and the longevity. Things become lindy. If you know what I mean by that comment, the longer the XRP-Fi thing goes on, the longer Flare is the predominant player in that, the more lindy it gets, the more mind share it's going to get, especially amongst institutional stablecoin deployers, which ultimately, the way we think about it is we effectively have seen that we have virtually unlimited demand for XRP-Fi. We have a limited ability to serve XRP-Fi today. So, we're not worried about the demand. We're mostly worried about sourcing stablecoins. So that's the first thing. I think there's going to be some big changes in how people see Flare. So at the moment it's known for XRP-Fi. There's some initiatives it's never not going to be known for XRP-Fi, but I also want it to be known for other things. So we've never served Flare's data. We've never used Flare's data protocols really outside of the ecosystem. That's going to change, and I think you'll see, at least one of the biggest players in the market using Flare's data outside of, not just for XRP-Fi, but for a totally different use. And then, you asked me about, was it 12, 24 months?
Yes.
Well, way before 12 months, we will launch Flare Confidential Compute, which is our stack that is private, verifiable, provides large amounts of compute. And so in conjunction with our data protocols, you have this interesting thing where you can do large computations, which means you can run big programs. But Flare also provides great data. And as we expand the FCC, we're doing, FTSO, within the FCC, FTC within the FTC. So you'll be able to get prices from the FTC directly without having to wait for it to resolve on chain. You'll be able to get information from other blockchains and from Web 2 APIs practically instantaneously. So if you combine that with large amounts of compute, suddenly there's some interesting things to do. So there's obviously stuff in AI and agents. It's interesting. I don't think agents. I'm less less interested in agents with regards to managing financial portfolios, or, I wouldn't put my money with an agent personally. Um, what you can run inside the FCC is more traditional models, things that are deterministic rather than probabilistic. So, like a quantitative investment model is a really good example. Takes an input, runs it through a whole bunch of formulas, has an output. And I think, a week ago you saw one of the SEC commissioners discuss how vaults across the space, if they're doing things that touch the SEC perimeter, need to be, either come into the SEC and talk to them about getting registered. Well, there's that. People will do that. But one of the things about being in this industry is we've always tried to innovate. And things can be made outside of the regulatory requirements if they don't meet the requirements for being regulated. And so I've been saying for a long time, but very few people have been listening to me, that vaults should become autonomous, meaning a curator should publish a model of how, their risk model, their investment model, should publish it privately, so it can fit within the Flare confidential compute stack privately. No one can see it, but they can verify that it's there, and they can verify certain parameters about it that are released by the curator. But it can run autonomously, and that would put it outside of the requirements to be a registered fund. For if that particular use case would require being a registered fund. Now, it's only the opinion of one commissioner, but it very much chimes with what I'm saying. So, I think we talk a lot about regulation in the industry. We don't talk enough about innovation so that we don't have to meet regulation. And I think that's where Flare's FCC comes in. It lets you do a lot more in a kind of strongly decentralized way. It lets you do things that you would usually run on a server, in a way that's verifiable, private, and useful.
And very interesting. In regards to, so we are currently in a larger part. I don't know what you think, but most of the ecosystem is still or there's still a lot of speculation in regard, if you compare the market size of the crypto industry with the financial industry, right? So this huge market, the financial industry. So when do you think, in regards to timing, I know it's not easy to say, but how far do you think that more kind of a utility market or a more scaled crypto system will be in place? Do you think it's 12 months, 2 years, 5 years? Where do you see a different crypto market where it's basically bigger? Overall, without saying like market cap, or just overall, when do you see a tipping point happening where we're going to see larger economies of scale with the digital asset space?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people always look at it one way around, which is when are institutions going to use crypto? That's obviously a key point, and I think Clarity will help with that. That said, it's fairly limited functionality, right? There's fairly limited things that you can do with crypto today, whether it's you have an RWA or not. Is it good for settlements? Yes, obviously. Yes, you can build lots and lots of things, but they really all start to get, the more complex you get, the more you're going to want to have a human in the loop, at which point you still need to be registered, and you still have to ask the question, is this like, is this worth doing in this space, right? So I think, in a short answer to your question, I think the time frame is at least 2 years, if not longer, for more institutional, to see real institutional growth. I think that's fair. I mean, there was a good analysis the other day that basically none of the RWAs that are issued on chain are being used by institutions, like non-crypto institutions. They're not being used by banks, all this kind of stuff. They're being principally deployed and used by institutions within crypto itself. They're using their own capital. But I think the question can also be asked another way around, and should be asked another way around, which is the two things merging? So, for instance, you've seen a lot of use cases where, or you've seen a few use cases where older industries have been effectively disintermediated. Polymarket's a really good example of that. Like, if you think of a sports book as being an institution, it has to be regulated. It's a financial institution, whether you like it or not, holds money on behalf of customers. Polymarket's completely disintermediated. That's provided the same outcome, but in a decentralized way. I think Hyperliquid does a similar thing with regards to perps markets, and not just for crypto instruments, but for any, for oil, for instance. So I think everyone wants the suits to come, and I think a lot of people don't ask the question, should we just get rid of the suits? And I think that's actually probably where more growth comes from in crypto, rather than waiting for the banks to play with us, or do both at the same time. So that's I suppose that's my answer.
Great answer. I agree 100% with that last point. Both should walk towards each other. I think that's the fastest way, rather than waiting banks to go towards digital asset space. Both should embrace. So I think it's a great way to finish this interview. I want to be aware of the time. So again, Hugo, many thanks for taking the time for this interview. I hope to have you soon, and let's speak soon.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks.
Bien, después de haber visto esta entrevista, me gustaría compartir contigo dos reflexiones muy sencillas. La primera es que Clarity, que se apruebe o no la ley Clarity, él particularmente no lo ve como un impedimento para Flare. Lo que sí que explica es que si el terreno, en este caso las vías, dejan de ser un terreno basado en barro o en tierra y pasa a ser asfalto, los coches que circulan por él podrán ir más rápido. A lo que yo añado que la CFTC y la SEC ya han explicado que van a lanzar guidelines, es decir, una especie de guía para que en caso de que la ley Clarity no se apruebe, ellos puedan operar, es decir, el sector bancario pueda operar con claridad regulatoria, intentando imitar las consecuencias jurídicas que tendría la aprobación de la ley Clarity, pero solamente con la acción del gobierno. En este caso, de los organismos encargados de velar por la regulación en estas áreas, CFTC y la SEC. Y la segunda idea es que hay una distinción enorme entre el comportamiento del inversor minorista y el inversor institucional. De hecho, el proyecto que quiero anunciar, espero que a finales de agosto, principios de septiembre, que está estrechamente relacionado con XRP y con Flare, tiene como objetivo precisamente eso: acercar el mundo institucional a los inversores minoristas. Y una de ellas es la diferencia de mentalidad entre el inversor minorista y el inversor mayorista. Has podido ver alguna de esas conclusiones en la entrevista, donde hago referencia a los lock-up periods, los periodos en los que se pide que tu dinero esté bloqueado. Y algo que el inversor minorista desconoce es que cuando tus activos están bloqueados durante muy poco tiempo, es decir, puedes retirar, y me refiero al contexto en el cual estás generando rentabilidad a tus XRP, cuando eres capaz de retirar esos activos en cuestión de segundos, en cuestión de minutos o en cuestión de muy pocas horas, al inversor minorista, al inversor no profesional, al inversor no cualificado, eso le genera sensación de seguridad, porque la inmediatez, por desgracia, y es a lo que está acostumbrado el inversor minorista, esa inmediatez le genera seguridad, el poder retirar los fondos rápido. Pero el modelo hacia el que vamos es todo lo contrario. La solidez de una inversión se mide, de hecho, por cuánto tiempo va a estar ese activo bloqueado. Y cuanto más tiempo, no necesariamente mejor, porque igual la rentabilidad no es superior, pero sí que demuestra que hay más solidez en el modelo de negocio que genera esa rentabilidad. Esto parece contraintuitivo para un inversor minorista, pero es lo habitual entre inversores institucionales, donde es muy habitual encontrar en el mundo off-chain periodos de lock-up, periodos de bloqueo de capital de 12 a 24 meses. Así que imaginaos la diferencia de profundidad entre lo que hay en el ecosistema de activos digitales, donde el retirar algo rápido que te está generando rentabilidad al inversor minorista le genera una falsa sensación de seguridad, cuando en realidad es todo lo contrario, porque probablemente esas estrategias de rentabilidad estén basadas en modelos de negocio muy poco sólidos, muy poco profundos, versus el inversor institucional que está mucho más acostumbrado a que si quieres construir algo sólido e importante y valioso como por ejemplo un rascacielos, vas a tener tu capital bloqueado entre 12 a 24 meses. Esa es la diferencia enorme que hay ahora mismo en el sector de activos digitales. Y los inversores minoristas van a tener que aclimatarse a esa mentalidad de inversor mayorista, de inversor institucional, de inversor profesional, sobre todo con formación, entendiendo en qué fase estamos ahora mismo y hacia qué fase vamos. Es cierto que a largo plazo lo que vamos a vivir es una realidad donde todo es muchísimo más líquido. Es decir, que vas a poder realizar pagos, quizá la compra en el supermercado, liquidando en esa compra acciones en vivo de Apple, oro tokenizado o otros activos que tengas en formato digital. Eso llegará. Y esos mercados líquidos, que es lo que traen los activos digitales, la posibilidad de que todos los mercados sean muchísimo más líquidos, llegarán. Pero esa colisión de mundos todavía no ha ocurrido. Y hace falta que ambos mundos caminen en la misma dirección, se fusionen para que esos escenarios de los cuales hemos hablado siempre, una economía tokenizada, una economía líquida, una economía en la cual puedes pagar con quizá una fracción de tu vivienda, una fracción de tu coche o una fracción de unas acciones de Apple, de Google o de lo que sea que poseas. Esa tokenización te permitiría pagar una compra en ese momento, renunciando a la propiedad de un activo. Eso llegará, pero todavía no está construido. Y espero que la conversación con Hugo refleje esa desconexión entre lo que se está construyendo, lo que sabemos que es el futuro, y lo que existe ahora mismo en el mercado. Y como tercera idea y como coletilla, me parece realmente interesante que Hugo, a pesar de todas las barreras que estamos viendo ahora con la Ley Clarity, vea que vamos a ver economías de escala o una especie de mercado de utilidad o un mercado de activos digitales mucho más grande que el actual en un periodo no más allá de 24 meses, es decir, 2 años. Si juntas eso con todo lo que he ido explicando en este canal, creo que los próximos 12 a 24 meses van a ser especialmente interesantes y echaríamos de menos ver a XRP a estos precios, igual que ahora echamos de menos ver a XRP a 0,30. Lo que me gustaría transmitir o como idea final es que hay un gap de conocimiento entre el inversor minorista y cómo se comporta un inversor institucional. Y ese es un recorrido que si eres un inversor en XRP vas a tener que hacer para empezar a pensar en términos institucionales, no en términos de meme coins o de Bitcoin. Dicho esto, espero que la entrevista te haya gustado. Si te ha aportado valor, si te parece interesante, te animo a que te suscribas al canal. Te recuerdo que en este canal cubro todo lo relacionado con el sector de activos digitales, en concreto la transición controlada de todo el sistema financiero hacia tecnologías de contabilidad distribuida, es decir, XRP, XLM, XDC, SHX, HBAR y un conjunto de activos digitales que van a cumplir una función complementaria en el futuro sistema financiero, basado entre otras muchísimas cosas en el estándar ISO 20022. Y todo esto englobado dentro de una transición muchísimo más compleja y profunda que consiste en dejar atrás el capitalismo y comenzar una nueva era post-capitalista, post-IA, post-trabajo, cuya transición muchos están bautizando como la singularidad económica, que consiste en el desacople del crecimiento del PIB del mercado laboral. Y todo eso explicado desde el punto de vista de las oportunidades que nos vamos a encontrar en el proceso para los inversores minoristas como tú y como yo en el sector de activos digitales. Esto es todo por ahora y nos vemos en el siguiente vídeo. Un saludo.